You're listening to The Globalists, first broadcast on the 17th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
The tactics are very simple. They bring us to the red line across which we can no longer retreat. We begin to respond.
Vladimir Putin says the war is at a turning point. We'll examine this and look at how the deployment of North Korean soldiers to the front line is affecting the situation. Also ahead...
Recognising a state of Palestine, which we did with Norway and Spain, and which other countries have done, is not a hostile act and should not be seen as a hostile act.
That may be Michael Martin, the Irish Foreign Minister's opinion, but it's not one with which Tel Aviv agrees, and it's closing its embassy in Dublin. We'll discuss Israel's isolationism. Zakir Hussain, the Indian tabla player, has died. We'll look back at the life of this four-time Grammy winner and icon of Indian classical music. The transport operator First Group was waiting for a bus for ages. And suddenly, 89 entire bus lines came at once. We'll investigate why the French company RATP is selling all its double-deckers to its British competitor. We'll get a roundup of fashion and retail news, have a riffle through the papers, and now you can read the mag, get on the list, and join the private members club. Forbes is opening an exclusive enclave in Madrid. We'll ask if media brands must diversify to stay ahead of the game. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. A Syrian advocacy group says a mass grave near Damascus has been found holding more than 100,000 victims of former President Bashar al-Assad's regime. Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has resigned after disputes with PM Justin Trudeau, adding pressure to his struggling government. And US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the AUKUS submarine deal with Australia aligns with President-elect Trump's call for burden sharing. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia has deployed North Korean soldiers in significant numbers for the first time. The troops, between 10 and 12,000 of them, are reportedly being used in assaults on Ukrainian forces defending an enclave in Russia's Kursk region. The United States joined 9 other nations and the European Union to condemn the increasing military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. The Ukrainian intelligence service says a group of North Korean soldiers killed 8 members of a Chechen unit fighting for Russia in a friendly fire incident. Well, let's get more on this with Jenny Mathers, who's a senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University. Jenny, welcome back to the show. I know you have a sleeping cat on your lap. Let's try not to disturb him. What exactly do we know about North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia?
So we know that there are approximately 10 to 12,000 of them. We know that they've been in Russia now for several months, presumably training with their Russian counterparts and getting ready to take part in operations. We know that they have recently begun to take part in active combat operations and that they are in the Kursk region of Russia, which Russian troops are attempting to take back from Ukrainian forces that seized territory there back in August.
And this friendly fire incident?
Yes, so it's one of a couple of examples that are being cited that the North Korean troops are maybe not as combat ready as Russia might have hoped them to be. So the friendly fire incident is an indication that, perhaps they're not very accustomed to operating in combat situations. In addition to firing on forces that are fighting with Russia, as the Chechens are, they also allegedly are not really taking cover when they come under attack from Ukrainian drones in particular, but sort of standing out in the open and trying to shoot them down. And this is alleged to be the cause of what are apparently quite high casualties among them, even at this early stage of their deployment.
And I imagine there's a language problem too.
Yes, I would imagine so. I mean, not that many Russians speak Korean, and perhaps not that many Korean members of the armed forces will speak Russian. So there will have been a lot of issues in terms of language, in terms of different military cultures, in terms of just integrating these troops into Russian operations.
And in terms of what's been done about these North Korean forces, we know that the United States has hit both North Korea and Russia with new sanctions just yesterday. But what else is being done to try and clamp down on this?
Well, I think there's attempts to put pressure on China as a country that might have some influence with North Korea, but also in general just to publicize the fact that they're there to demonstrate that Russia is expanding and escalating this war by bringing in soldiers from a third party, which otherwise would have absolutely nothing to do with this conflict. North Korea doesn't inherently have any interests in Russia's war in Ukraine. So it is sort of a blatant attempt by Russia to widen the conflict and potentially also, of course, to strengthen North Korea's military capabilities, which, of course, South Korea and other states in the Asia-Pacific region are very concerned about.
Jenny, what more can you tell us about this news that's come in overnight about the Russian general who's been killed in an explosion in Moscow? He was Lieutenant General Kirillov, head of the Nuclear, Biological, Chemical Defense Forces. How significant is this?
It is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, this particular general has been accused of responsibility for using chemical weapons against Ukraine. And he was sentenced in absentia just yesterday, in fact, by Ukraine's security services for using banned chemical weapons in Ukraine. The other significance, of course, is that it happened in Moscow, it happened in Russia, and the assumption is that the Ukrainian special forces were possibly behind this. It seems like otherwise quite a stunning coincidence to have this sequence of events happening and this general being vulnerable in Moscow's capital, in Russia's capital itself. So I think it indicates that Ukraine's forces, Ukraine's intelligence services have got some considerable reach.
Now, Russia's reportedly lost over 1,000 soldiers in the past couple of days. But Putin says that the war's at a turning point. He appears to think it's turning to his advantage. I mean, we know that Russia's boosting their ballistic arsenal. But is there evidence that this is the case? Is it going Russia's way?
Well, I suppose it depends on your time horizon. So what Putin wants to do is to talk up Russia's chances to convince not only Russians and Ukrainians, but also people outside, particularly in the United States, that Russia is unstoppable and cannot be defeated, and therefore Ukraine should be put under pressure to make a deal. And this very much lines up with what we expect Donald Trump to try and do once he is actually in office. But if you look at the facts on the ground, I mean, the reason that Putin has given for saying the tide has turned in Russia's favor is that there's an increased number of allegedly volunteers coming forward in Russia to sign up for military service and fight in Ukraine. But we know that that's very unlikely because of all the pressures that the recruitment offices have been under in Russia, the way that they've had to go and recruit from the prisons, even the women's prisons, which is quite extraordinary. And of course, the fact that they're using North Korean troops to defend their own territory, which they couldn't defend back in August when Ukrainian forces crossed the border. So it all looks a bit like whistling in the dark to me, to be honest, and trying to big up Russia's chances in advance of some kind of peace negotiations to come in the new year.
When Trump takes over on the 20th of January. I mean, Trump's just recently said it'll take 100 years to rebuild Ukraine's cities. He then went on to claim the war would never have happened if he'd been president. He also said that the losses are far worse on both sides than have been reported. Is he right on any of these points?
Well, on the last point, he may be right in that, military losses tend to be regarded as state secrets in wartime. And so it is entirely likely that both sides are, selectively releasing these kinds of details and may very well be underplaying them for all kinds of reasons. So on that one, he could very well be right. But saying that, there was no war when he was president is nonsense because, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine has been going on since 2014, throughout his presidency. The idea that it'll take 100 years to rebuild Ukrainian cities, well, it depends on the amount of resources that are put into that project. And already we've had, a series of Ukrainian reconstruction conferences cases with donors pledging money and private business getting involved. So I think that is also quite unlikely as a prediction.
Now, I mean, Trump may think he can stop the war, but I wonder if he can stop Russia's expansionist agenda. I mean, reading about a Polish admiral who oversees the Baltic Sea, which of course borders 8 NATO countries and Russia, he says that Moscow's disrupting mobile communications and ship tracking data across the Baltic Sea, endangering vessels and energy supplies to test how Western powers will respond. So even if the war does end on day one of Trump's presidency, as he boasts it will, can Russia's activities be contained?
Well, not if Russia is placated, and if Putin sees that his reward for military expansionism and his reward for being a tough guy and trying to steal what isn't his is actually that he gets to keep what he's stolen, and he's encouraged to go for more. So I think they're right to say that ending the war in Ukraine will not end Russia's expansionism. It won't end Russia's desire to disrupt political, social, and economic life in Western countries, because he regards the West as at war with Russia and has been for quite some time. So I think that's quite a fantasy land to live in, to think that the war in Ukraine ends and therefore all of our broader security issues with Russia will also come to an end.
Jenny, thank you very much indeed. That was Jenny Mathers there. And this is The Globalist. In May 2024, Ireland, along with Spain and Norway, formally recognised the Palestinian state. This decision led to Israel recalling its ambassadors from Ireland, Norway and Spain, and now it says it's going to completely close its embassy in Dublin. Well, I'm joined by Yossi Meckelberg, who's an Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. Yossi, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Morning.
What's the history of the Israeli embassy in Ireland?
Again, it's surprising that as a European country, maybe the EU, Israel didn't have until the 1990s an embassy there. There's always kind of a prickly relations between Israel and Ireland. It goes back from, with the relation with the Ireland, with the PLO back in the 60s and mainly the 70s. The sort of affinity that Ireland feels towards the plight of the Palestinians in a way that most Europe doesn't. Because of their history and the idea that they've shared history. I mean, sometimes it's kind of very oversimplistic comparative politics here, but the idea that those both two forces that fight against colonialism, against oppression, so they equate in Ireland their struggle against the role of Great Britain and the UK with what the Palestinians are going through with the Israelis. So there always been this kind of tension there. On the other, also close relations as well, in trade and tourism work. So it's kind of...
So why are they closing the embassy?
Well, I think there is no good answer to that, because I think it's an act of self-harm there from Israel's point of view. Israel, through its existence, always looked for having diplomatic ties with as many countries as possible. And here is a country, yes, there are diplomatic relations, there are close relations, but at the same time, there are differences. So the decision to recognize Palestinian statehood, Spain, Norway did, but again, if you look at the entire globe, most countries in the world actually recognize Palestinian statehood. So if Israel decided not to have ambassadors in countries that recognize Palestine as a state, they should withdraw most of their ambassadors around the world. The other thing is, with closing the embassy itself, because the ambassador, Dana Ehrlich, by the way, one of the most talented professional diplomats, young diplomats, she worked from Spain in the last few months. Is the idea that because of Ireland decided to join the petition or the South African petition for genocide, the ICJ, that they closed the embassy. But it means it will take years to reopen it. And if you are not there as a diplomat, you don't have a say, you don't have influence. The Jewish community is worried. Now, to be fair to the Israelis and to some of the attacks against the ambassador specifically, it was unacceptable, as bad as incitement to kill her. You know, her face, not Israel, not even the fact, her face on billboards were covered with blood. So there incitement, there is anti-Semitism in Ireland, which is unacceptable. But at the same time, this completely legitimate decision by Ireland, A, to recognize Palestinian statehood, and B, whether Israel like it or not, the part of the conversation in the international community is about the way that Israel conducts the war in Gaza and whether it amounts to a genocide or not.
Mm-hmm. There's a new embassy opening, though, in Moldova. So what's the thinking behind that?
So there is, the Israeli government, as we all know, it's all about bravado. It's all about appealing to the base. So, yes, you have 10 seconds of bravado of, we are closing embassy, we are making protests, and then you need to rebuild relations with a country. On the other hand, they are looking to the countries that are, their democracy is a bit more subdued, if you can, if I can put it like this, and that are friendly to Israel. They don't mind human rights is not top of their priority. So if Israel continue the war in Gaza, and it's just reached 45,000 people killed in Gaza, more than half of them, at least more than half of them, civilians, countries like Moldova probably won't protest too much. They won't recognize Palestinian statehood. But that's not the way to conduct foreign policy and diplomacy. I talk only the one that like me. I talk only to one that support my policies, instead of one of the public diplomacy is a major role in the diplomatic world, that you try to convince those who criticize you. So it's a very immature approach to diplomacy.
I mean, tell us more about this, about the foreign policy trajectory under the current government.
I mean, it's a very, I wouldn't, confrontational one. It's, if you don't support us, you must be against us. It's going back to the very oversimplistic binary approach in international relations, that you have to support us, you have always to understand our plight, and if we go to war and we kill so many civilians, it's because Israel is always the victim. Of course, October 7 was a terrible massacre, and no one ever said that Israel didn't have a casus belli and right to go to war. It's about the way it conducts its war. And the other thing, as all of it happened, in Israel there is a far-right government that looks for confrontation in order to consolidate the base. It's on the way to probably annex the West Bank and makes at least the move that looks like it leads towards annexing the West Bank, ending any possibility of a two-state solution, entrenching the occupation, clearing North Gaza that looked like ethnic cleansing, and talking about building settlements in Gaza. So they are looking for those who would approve it, but this is going to attract criticism in the international community. And it's interesting if Biden in the dying days of this administration actually going to support a Security Council resolution that will call to stop all of this.
And as you say, I mean, very key, very germane to this issue was the case before the ICJ brought by South Africa. Just remind us of what the status of that is right now.
Yeah. Again, personally, I think this was not the right move by South Africa, calling and appealing or petitioning to the ICJ about genocide. I think, and I said it here many times, most of the effort, the focus should be on a ceasefire, because all of these legal affairs don't stop the killing. They don't help a certain person in Gaza. Whether people are killed, whether it's part of genocide and any other war crimes, or even not war crimes, doesn't help people. What it needed for many months now, at least 10 months, 11 months, is a ceasefire. Now, South Africa, again, evoking its own memories and history, decided in support of Palestinians to petition for the ICJ to decide whether it's what's happening in Gaza is a genocide or not. But this kind of legal effort can take 4 years, while what's happening in Gaza is ongoing killing and humanitarian disaster. So that's what I think where the focus should be.
So Yossi, I mean, are we seeing Israel then become increasingly isolationist?
I think this is the sad case. And if you think only 14 months ago, once October 7 happened, Israel probably got the support, and rightly so, from the entire world. And they managed to waste all of it, spend all of it very quickly, because they saw it as a license to do unacceptable thing. And when I say about genocide, it doesn't mean what happens is right. And little doubt of my mind for what I've seen in so many clips and read so many that there are war crimes that actually are taking place in Gaza. The more it goes on, the more isolated Israel is. It still has its supporter, and it's interesting, there is a new factor entering in January, which is the Trump administration, which can change much of it. But I think international Israel probably reached a nadir that it hasn't been ever before in terms of isolation, public opinion, the demonstration that we see everywhere. It's not only in support of Palestinians, it's direct criticism of the way that Israel conducts its affairs.
Yossi, thank you very much indeed. That's Yossi Meckelberg there. Now, still to come on the programme. We remember Indian tabla musician Zakir Hussain. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's 7:22 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin, and I'm joined in the studio now by Claudine Fry. She's a partner at Control Risks, and she's here to have a look through the newspapers. Good morning to you, Claudine.
Good morning.
Now, yesterday we were looking at Germany and the fact that Olaf Scholz at that point was about to lose the confidence vote. In fact, that has happened. Now, of course, the country's heading for early elections. How's this been covered?
Yeah, that's right. There is coverage. I think, first of all, it's perhaps worth pointing out, even though this confidence vote in Olaf Scholz was expected, it's a constitutional requirement after the government collapsed in November, and the outcome was not surprising at all. But it's received wide coverage, including in the FT, because it is symbolic. Germany is really at a critical juncture domestically and geopolitically, and we now have one of the major powers of Europe heading towards an uncertain snap election that's going to take place at the end of February.
What's this done to the markets there?
It's further added further uncertainty and gloom, to be honest. We had the central bank just the other day reducing its forecast for next year down to 0.1% GDP growth 2025 for Germany. This is a country which is really floundering as it's still struggling to come to terms with the implications of Russia invading Ukraine and losing its access to cheap gas. And now layering on top of that, the prospect of having to deal with a much more uncertain transatlantic relationship.
There's a lovely quote from one of the Green politicians who just said, "We're all just fed up with each other."
Yes, I saw that. I thought that was brilliant. Yes, exactly. And so it means that however the elections turn out, it's going to be really difficult for the parties that are performing reasonably well to find a way of working together. So whatever happens, we're probably going to be in another uncertain coalition government, which may or may not find an ability to overcome differences and rule together effectively. But I think it's notable to say that all the main political parties that are fairly central on the political spectrum have ruled out working with the more extreme elements, including the AfD, an extreme right-wing party that has started to secure something like 20% of popular support in Germany now.
Another world leader in trouble, Justin Trudeau. His finance minister's resigned. It's really not good news for him.
That's right. I think it's really telling that we're talking about Germany and Canada this morning in the paper review. Two countries traditionally exceptionally stable and sources of sort of reassurance and certainty, and yet both of them actually in a degree of domestic political turmoil, some of which is linked to some kind of trepidation around what the new Trump government will bring. For Canada, that's because Trump has already indicated that he is set to introduce pretty punishing tariffs on Canada, along with Mexico and China, upon entering office. And that has fed into some disagreement within Canada because there is not a consensus around how to respond to Trump. So the New York Times is among the papers reporting on the resignation of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who has been in an increasingly fractious relationship with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and has resigned, criticising Trudeau's approach to fiscal prudence, to the economy and to his response to threats from Trump.
And of course, this leaves him in a very bad position for the election.
That's right. He is not a popular man. His approval ratings have absolutely plummeted. And he doesn't even have the assurance of guaranteed support from within his own Liberal Party. There are many legislators and members of his own party who are calling for him to stand down. And yet actually at the moment he seems determined to hang on. And an election has to be called by October. There are some people calling for a snap election, but at the moment he seems determined to hang on somehow.
And I mean, Trump did recently, I mean, he was teasing him, but he was calling him the governor of the great state of Canada, implying that, you know, America would just take it over.
Yes, exactly. It's not going to be easy for US neighbours, allies and adversaries alike to manage Trump. And Trump is definitely a source of great concern for both Mexico and Canada. There is a free trade agreement between the three countries, which is coming up for discussion next year. But actually, our sense at Control Risks is that Trump will probably have to reach some form of agreement with Mexico and Canada around how to continue that deal rather than walking away from it. So there are cards that Mexico and Canada will be able to play.
Let's talk about a company that feels that Trump is probably going to save it, and that's TikTok. So they've asked the Supreme Court to temporarily block a law that would effectively ban it in the US. But I also see that the head of TikTok is going to be meeting Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So one assumes that there might be quite a large donation coming his way.
That's right. It's extraordinary how many people seem to be making their way to Mar-a-Lago. You just imagine the schedulers, how they fit all these dinners and lunches and so on in. Yes, that's right. TikTok battling to try and prevent a ban taking effect in the new year. In fact, right before Trump is inaugurated. And Trump has actually for a while been somewhat supportive of TikTok and has indicated that he would not necessarily support a ban on the platform. So yes, there is a huge amount of speculation that TikTok and its overtures by its owner ByteDance towards Trump will in some way save it and enable 170 million Americans to continue using the platform. But this is a country where there are important sources of authority other than the White House, and the Supreme Court has been asked to hear on the case. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. TikTok has asked the Supreme Court to make its views clear by at least the 6th of January, because there would actually be quite an enormous amount of complexity in the sort of from a technological perspective in terms of actually removing the platform from American users' access.
And we mustn't forget, of course, that Trump has a technical person in his government. I mean, Elon Musk is right there by his side advising him on all of this. We also know that Trump doesn't like Facebook. If TikTok continues to operate, that will damage Facebook.
That's right. And we know Trump loves controversy. He loves the free market. He loves competition. And indeed, we have Musk right at his side there. It has to be said, not necessarily on a long-term basis. There's a long track record of Trump falling out with people around him, particularly those who are also incredibly charismatic and able to attract an enormous amount of attention and so on. But for the moment, the presence of Musk, you have to assume, must be having an influence on the position Trump will take on TikTok, yes.
Yeah. Now, TikTok, of course, is one of the things that's blamed for our very short attention span. And now it seems that books are adapting to that.
That's right. I picked out this guest essay in the New York Times by Margaret Renkel. Headline, short books perfect for our distracted age. And I think we can all relate to that. And you're right, yes, partly because of the way we're absorbing technology, engaging with information. We seem to have exceptionally short attention spans. But also the news around us, the world around us is depressing, let's say. It's also incredibly fast moving. And so finding sources of solace and satisfaction can be difficult. And perhaps the long, slow read is not as popular as it was before. You only have to walk into a bookshop these days and see the increasingly wide variety of short stories and poetry collections and so on to see that these kinds of books are having a bit of a moment. Margaret says that she's a slow reader and she prefers these books because they're just an easier source of solace at this point in time. And she says she's not writing about short books or promoting their use because it's a numbers game, although I have to admit I have myself reverted to short books this year to try and get through an overall a greater number of books. I can't say I'm necessarily succeeding, but I can definitely recommend the short story.
Well, and if people want to get hold of or have recommendations for more short books, there's an independent publishing house called Weatherglass Books, and they've launched a novella prize. It's judged by Ali Smith, and it's a really great imprint. And if you just look that up, you can either write your own short book and join the prize, or at least read the winners. All very, very much recommended. And if you want to know more about that, do tune in to Meet the Writers on our archive. There's an interview there with Damien Lanigan, the wonderful author, who will tell you all about it. Claudine Fry, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The head of a US-based Syrian advocacy organisation says that a mass grave outside of Damascus has been found containing the bodies of at least 100,000 people killed by the former government of ousted President Bashar al-Assad. Muaz Mustafa said the site, 25 miles north of the Syrian capital, was one of 5 mass graves that he'd identified over the years. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians are estimated to have been killed since 2011, when Assad's crackdown on protests against his rule grew into a full-scale civil war. Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland resigned yesterday after clashing with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on issues including how to handle possible US tariffs, dealing an unexpected blow to an already unpopular government. The resignation of Freeland, who also served as Deputy Prime Minister, is one of the biggest crises Trudeau's faced since taking power in November 2015. It also leaves him without a key ally when he's on track to lose the next election to the official opposition Conservatives. And the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine partnership with Australia will benefit the United States and is the kind of burden-sharing deal that President-elect Donald Trump has talked about, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said. Sullivan said he had confidence AUKUS would endure under the Trump presidency as it enhances US deterrent capability in the Indo-Pacific and has Australia contributing to the US industrial base. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. One of the world's greatest tabla players, 4-time Grammy winner and an icon of Indian classical music, Zakir Hussain, has died at the age of 73. Well, joining me from Calcutta to look back at the great man's career is the writer, composer and musician Amit Chowdhury. Amit, that was Zakir Hussain we heard playing at the top there. I think that particular one was from a festival in Poland back in 2015. I wonder if you could explain what kind of instrument the tabla is and how it's played.
Thanks, Georgina. So the tabla consists to percussion Units, the English term for these are drums, of course. I always feel a little hesitant using that word because the word has particular associations in the English language when it comes to Western drumming and when it comes to drumming outside of the West. While the percussive sounds created by the tabla are literally a language of their own. And this has evolved over centuries, especially the last 2 centuries, making the tabla a really wonderful accompanying instrument, but also wonderful soloists instrument, in a way that the drums are not in any culture, as far as I know. I mean, the extent to which the tablas were taken in the direction of the solo is unusual, I think, and specific to the tabla. Its provenance seems to be kind of, there's no consensus about how it emerged. Its precursor instrument for percussion, which accompanists played this instrument along with singers in a form called the dhrupad, is a drum called the pakhavaj, which has a narrow end and a broader end. And the tabla too, it has 2 separate units. The narrow tabla, which is actually often called the tabla, on the right, usually for right-handed people, which produces the high-pitched and very sort of complex rhythmic permutations that a tabla player is capable of generating. And on the left, you have the bass drum, which produces the kind of basis, the foundation for any sort of rhythmic cycle or tal.
So I understand he also played with a lot of Western artists. For instance, ABBA, George Harrison of the Beatles. He played with the cellist Yo-Yo Ma, also Van Morrison. So, I mean, this really universal appeal.
Right, yeah. And so he's kind of responsible for being a kind of ambassador, to kind of use a slightly cliched formulation, but it's true of him. An ambassador of the tabla of Indian classical music is a kind of ambassadorship which had begun with Ravi Shankar, really, who was taking it out in the previous generation, taking out Indian classical music concert for Bangladesh, or the Monterey Pop Festival. And this legacy is then further extended, almost independent for the first time of instrumental soloists like Ravi Shankar, almost independent of that, with just this percussionist, Zakir Hussain. He manages to pull it off just as a percussionist, a tabla player, who can almost exist as this independent of the milieu and the context of the parameters of Indian classical, North Indian classical music as a soloist in his own right.
Amit, thank you very much indeed. That was Amit Chowdhury talking to us about Zakir Hussain, the great tabla player who's died at the age of 73. It is 8:37 in Paris, 7:37 here in London. RATP, the giant French transport company, owns and operates 89 bus lines in London, making it one of the principal double-decker companies here. But now it says it'll sell the lot to First Group. Well, Christian Woolmar is a transport historian and author of the book Cathedrals of Steam. Christian, what can you tell us about the company RATP?
Well, they're a very big publicly owned enterprise which operate in about 15 countries, employ about 60,000 people. And they're, in a way, what in London we might have had, like from Transport for London or London Transport, if they'd been allowed to expand in that way. So they're really a kind of state-owned enterprise that has then expanded across the world to take on services in towns and cities using the expertise that they've developed in Paris, where, of course, there's not only a very good transport system, there's an expanding one. They're about to get 3 new metro lines.
Why is it selling its London operation then?
Well, it's quite a competitive market. I suspect that they got quite a good offer from First Group, which already has a lot of services in London. It's a slightly tricky market because it's a franchise system. So you operate buses under the name of Transport for London, and you're trying to you make money by essentially trying to squeeze costs. it's not kind of a very exciting type of business. It's very limited because all the fares, of course, go to Transport for London, and there isn't any kind of incentive to boost the market. So I somewhat suspect they might be cashing in, getting quite a good deal from First Group, and moving to other pastures.
And what might those pastures be? What will the company focus on next?
Well, there's a lot of expansion across the world. There's, for example, there's Saudi Arabia, in which they're interested in, which is developing a whole new tube system. There's 400 cities in the world with light rail, and about 250 with underground systems. So there's a lot of potential out there for an enterprising company to run those services. So some towns and cities do it themselves, but a lot kind of contracted out to expert companies. Now, oddly enough, in London, for example, we've just got the Elizabeth line is going to be run partly by the Tokyo Metro. So it's an international, worldwide business and a growing one, because towns and cities across the world are expanding their public transport networks.
And what do we know about First Group, who have bought these 89 bus lines?
Well, First Group emerged in the 1980s out of the privatization of buses. And they were one of the big 4 or 5 companies like Go Ahead and Stagecoach who took advantage of the fact that the bus market, which had once just been a local authority monopoly, was then both privatized and broken up. And they built themselves into a multinational company. They did have a lot of interest in America at one point, although they've reined back on that. For example, they used to run a lot of these school buses, and at one point they owned Greyhound, I think. But they rather reined back on that and are focusing on their sort of core business, which is running trains, like Great Western is one of their franchises on the railways, and bus networks across many towns and cities in Britain. They were originally came from Scotland, from Aberdeen.
And I see that they've just announced the acquisition of the rail operator Grand Union Trains.
Yes, now that's all part of the emphasis now on open access services on the rail network. So most of the services are going to be run by Great British Railways. And so companies like First Group are going to lose their franchises. They're going to be handed over to the government. But there's still a kind of a chink in the armour of Great British Railways, which is these open access contracts. So Grand Union is one of them. And they operate contracts on a different basis. They just operate a certain number of services, not very many, which they operate independently of the rest of rail network. So that's the market they're kind of now focusing on in terms of railways.
Christian, thank you very much indeed. That was Christian Wolmer there, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Well, it's time to talk fashion and retail with Benedict Brown, who's a fashion journalist and a consultant specialising in menswear. Good morning to you, Benedict.
Good morning.
Now, we're reaching the end of the year, and it's been kind of crazy for creative directors within the fashion industry, right?
It has. The roller coaster continues, and it's nice it's perhaps coming to a bit of an end, which bodes well for 2025. But the big news is coming from Paris last week, where Chanel appointed Matteo Blasi as its artistic director. The position had been vacant since the spring, so there are a lot of murmurs around who was going to kind of step into those boots. But Blasi has come from Bottega Veneta, where he was for a short period of time there for 3 years. But his resume is extremely impressive for only being 40 years old. He's been at Raf Simons, Margiela, Calvin Klein, Celine, and then of course Bottega. And it's going to be really interesting to see what he does there, because he's passionate about craftsmanship. He really put that to the forefront of Bottega, and obviously at Chanel, that is the most important thing, is the craft.
And so we can expect his first collection
in spring. In September. In September, he assumes a position in spring, and then his first collection will be in September. So spring/summer 26 collections.
Yeah, and just talking about this roller coaster of changing creative directors, do you think that's come to an end? Are most of the major houses sorted at the moment?
I think so. There have been so many surprises this year, you can't really be too sure. I mean, I feel like I'm on transfer deadline day, listing out all these moves. So John Galliano exited Margiela last week. The day before, actually, Blasi was announced as at Chanel. Louise Trotter has left Carvin, and she's gone to Bottega Veneta. Alessandra Michel earlier this year in spring was appointed creative director at Valentino. Kim Jones has stepped away from his work at Dior Men's to focus on Fendi. Peter Doe has departed from Helmut Lang. Julian Klausner has kind of ascended at Dries Van Noten after Dries retired earlier this year. I can go on. Sarah Burton at Givenchy, which is in September that was announced. Hader Ackerman at Tom Ford. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I hope that perhaps next year there won't be too many moves, but because it seems like everyone's done it this year. So we shall see. But it's an exciting time for sure. Yeah.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, which is Uniqlo.
Yes, everyone's favourite high street brand, I think. At least for me. Uniqlo is the master of collaborations. I think they're endless. I mean, every time you go into any of its stores, there are collaborations there, whether it's with Disney, whether it's with Basquiat or Keith Haring, or in this case, to mark its 40th anniversary, it's kind of re-releasing its greatest hits of its collaborations with Le Maire, Jill Sander, and Engineered Garments. And I think everyone's a fan of Uniqlo's collaborations. I mean, I actually came into the studio today wearing one of them. And it's just, it kind of really underlines the fact that Uniqlo has really kind of got its fingers into the zeitgeist a bit. It knows what its Gen Z customers want, but it's able to produce design-led clothing at really affordable prices.
Absolutely. My trousers are
there we go.
Uniqlo, but my bag is Chanel.
There we go. There we go.
But there is this whole thing about the functionality of it. Is that what appeals?
For sure. I think Uniqlo, I mean, unlike the likes of Zara and H&M, which are very much reactive brands. They see what's trending on the catwalk shows in February and September, and they react to that. Whereas Uniqlo has really kind of cemented itself as being kind of a provider of wardrobe staples. And whilst they do that, they have their button downs and their chinos and all those simple bits and their really affordable cashmere crew necks. They are able to kind of offer their customer base something with a bit more functionality, a bit more design-led kind of outerwear, which has been received really, really well.
Finally, let's have a chat about the costume designer Ariane Phillips, because she's involved in this new film.
Yes, A Complete Unknown is the upcoming biopic about Bob Dylan, which is directed by James Mangold. James Mangold, it's not his first kind of biopic. He did Walk the Line with Joaquin Phoenix and... gosh, I forget her name. But anyway, one of my favourite films. She's a bit of a rock star in the costume world. She's received 3 nominations for Academy Awards, which was, like I said, Walk the Line, W.E., which was one of Madonna's films, and then more recently, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was that kind of Tarantino 70s epic. So Bob Dylan arrives in New York in the 1960s as a 19-year-old, not really knowing where his place was, but knew that he was destined for stardom, wearing Levi's. And Ariana Phillips kind of worked really closely with Levi's on kind of reproducing some key pieces from Bob Dylan's time. And Bob Dylan was way ahead of the curve. He had his girlfriend kind of create custom gussets on his jeans, just to basically widen them to essentially make them fit over his boots. And this happened before Levi's introduced the bootcut jean, which I think is just one of many reasons why he was such a trendsetter in so many different ways. But yeah, in collaboration with Levi's, she's reproduced a few kind of key styles, which is the 501 jean he wore when he entered New York in the early 60s, to then he moved more into a slimmer cut, which is perhaps what he's better known for. Additionally, there's a suede trucker jacket and his iconic D-belt, which is pretty a bit of a signature.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes out in 2 weeks' time. It's exclusive on Levi's online, and it's just a really nice way to summarise his legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to point out here that the book on which this is based is written by Elijah Ward, and he did speak to me about not that he hadn't written this book at that point, but you can find an interview with him in our Monocle archives. So we are reaching the end of the year. Christmas is coming up. What are the men's trends that we are looking forward to?
Looking forward to next year? Well, at least for me, I'm looking forward to the continuation of everyone embracing tailoring in a much bigger way. That's my interest, as we talked about earlier. So I think tailoring will continue to kind of become a bit more playful, a bit more exciting, and I think people will look to tailoring to be more as a garment for leisure, less so than work. So that's one of them. I think just a kind of a bit more of a move towards this kind of quiet luxury. I think that's still going to be a prevailing theme next year. I don't think people are quite ready for logo mania once again. So those would probably be my top 2 picks.
Excellent stuff. Well, I look forward to it. Get rid of those logos. Benedict, thank you very much indeed. That is Benedict Brown, and you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. US media group Forbes, which started as a magazine in 1917, is diversifying and plans to open a high-end private members club in Madrid next week. Forbes House Madrid, situated in the financial district, is a partnership between Forbes and Spain Media, publisher of Forbes España, one of Forbes' 43 local licensed editions. The venue's a testing ground for a wider rollout of private members clubs around the world. Well, Simon Brooke is a journalist, a communications consultant. He joins me now. Simon, sorry, I have to just start by asking, are you a member of a club yourself?
I knew you were going to ask me that, Georgina. I have to say I'm not, no. I was thinking actually coming here this morning, probably my career would have been even more stellar if I had joined a club. But I'm just not, unfortunately, a very clubbable person. So when I've looked around, I've just thought, this is nice, but do I really want to fork out an annual membership fee and then go and pay for dinner, lunch, drinks or whatever? So I don't know, perhaps I need to rethink my club strategy.
Well, there are plenty of people who do want to do that, and I assume some willing clientele for this new club. What do we know about Forbes's plan?
Well, it's large. Forbes House Madrid, as it's called, is set out across 7 floors, and it features a rooftop bar, which I think in Madrid would be absolutely lovely, wouldn't it? It's got a restaurant headed by a Michelin-starred chef, Adolfo Santos, and it's got a wine cellar. Very importantly, I suppose, for a club, it's got a private members club. It's got flexible event spaces, we're told, and also an auditorium. And according to Forbes, it's tailored to an elite global community of entrepreneurs, leaders and innovators.
So why is it doing this?
Well, I think the short answer, excuse me, is when you look at the challenges facing journalism at the moment, certainly in terms of advertising revenues, all kinds of media outlets now are expanding their offer, a bit of brand extension, as we might call it. So we've seen everybody from Vogue to Marketing Week to business magazine, called MCA, which is for the eating and drinking out industry, doing things like events. Magtailing was something we saw as well, where we've seen magazines selling products as well as writing about them. So really, I think the idea is to look for a new revenue stream, but also to expand the brand as well.
How else is Forbes diversifying?
Well, they've got regular events where they bring together entrepreneurs. They also have their 30 under 30 event, which is looks at successful entrepreneurs in that sort of younger age group. And they bring together in their conferences and other events influential leaders, policymakers, entrepreneurs, all kinds of people. So the idea, I think, is if you've got this strong brand, people trust it. It's known to be the voice of business. It's known to cover entrepreneurial issues and business issues. So why not expand it and really do everything you can to make the most of that brand?
I mean, what are the benefits? Obviously financial, but to media houses of expanding into these sort of ventures?
Well, I was thinking about that. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because obviously the point about, I mean, there was a time before the days of the internet when newspapers were a sort of physical entity and magazines a physical entity. And we've seen, well, Monocle is a great example of this, how there is still an opportunity to develop print media. But on the other hand, today, given that so much of print media is consumed online, it's virtual, isn't it? There's no physical aspect to it. So I think the great advantage of something like Forbes House, and we'll see how it expands around the world, is, and the same with conferences, it's a sort of physical manifestation of that print media, isn't it? So you can actually go into Forbes House, you can eat their food, if you like, cooked by this Michelin-starred chef, and you can go to the conferences and mingle with people. So I think in this virtual world, the opportunities here are for strong news brands to create a physical extension there.
So does print media need to expand into other areas in order to thrive?
Well, certainly it looks like it at the moment anyway. If you look at the state of the advertising market, I mean, here in the UK, for instance, print sales fell. Print sales of newspapers, magazines fell by 10% just between the years 22 and 23. So in many ways, if they are going to sustain themselves financially and develop their brand, they do have to look further beyond just print. And there's a great opportunity here. We've seen over the last few years that people will pay for a quality product when it comes to the print media and news reporting generally. So I think there are opportunities for them to really develop here, but they've really got to make sure they plan their strategy well. I mean, it was just interesting if you're thinking, for instance, of private members clubs, probably the most famous one, and I wasn't allowed to join this one because I was blackballed from Soho House when it first started, believe it or not.
Why?
I don't know. That's what's so spooky. I just got a rather stiff letter from them saying your application has been denied or rejected or whatever. And I was told by the person who was proposing me and the person who seconded me, you're a shoo-in, Simon. Don't worry. This will happen. So what I've done wrong, what I did wrong, I don't know. But I suppose you asked me at the beginning of the conversation why I never wanted to join, why I'm not a member of a club. Perhaps it was the trauma of being rejected from my first application.
I was going to say about this description of Forbes House. It's kind of Soho House-like. And I wonder if these things go in cycles, because there was this kind of huge frisson of excitement around Soho House and everybody wanted to join. And now it's really not the kind of place that you or I particularly would want to be in. Does it go inside? Is that how Clubland works? Do you think?
I think it does. Yeah, I think the point about when Soho House and the Groucho was the original modern club, wasn't it? It's opened in the mid-80s. Up to that point, if you talked about a private members club in London, New York, Paris, it was very, very old-fashioned. It looked like a relic of the 19th century, probably going out of business. And then suddenly, as I say, the Groucho here in the UK suddenly
temporarily shut. Actually.
Well, absolutely, yes. Well, we know, yes. So sort of interesting. Even though they are opening a branch in a small village in Yorkshire now, rather bizarrely. So they obviously think there's potential. I'm just looking here in the UK, clubs opening, Albright 22, the George. So there's obviously a market here.
The George is very dog friendly. I keep trying to get them to invite me to have a look around because Bella, my dog, would absolutely adore
Hopefully they're listening then.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. That's Simon Brooke. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Laura Kramer, Carlotta Rebello and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher, Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager, Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from Alan Whedon. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing will be live at midday in London, and the Globalists will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.